This is the Intercom website at intercom.com. The first thing that pops up here, or that calls my attention, is this massive sort of painterly illustration. And the web has gone through phases when it comes to things like illustrations. And you might remember some of them. One of them was websites had a lot of photographs. Another one was websites had a lot of hand-drawn illustrations, flat 2D figures. Another one was that they started using 3D models. But one reason this stands out to me is that it's quite rare to see a website use such painterly illustrations. I assume that's because it's more effort. I don't know if this is AI generated, especially because this is an AI first sort of themed website. This could be AI art, and that would be more appropriate, I think. But if it's not AI generated, they've put a lot of effort into creating this artwork for their website, especially when often these sorts of things don't get to shine because people are viewing these websites on mobile or smaller screens, smaller windows. So this is quite a bold move, and just based on some of the other things Intercom has done over the years with website design, I'm not surprised they're making bold moves. That's definitely the sort of thing they would do. That they're always very sort of design conscious and make big decisions. So I really like this, partly because it's just a different style for the type of website, especially for a sort of a SaaS platform website. But I also like it because it represents this concept they're going for. So not only is it slightly different, it fits in quite well because it's talking about new age and AI first. They're showing this very futuristic looking city, but also contrasting it with this very pleasant looking sort of valley or grassland. So that they're really leaning into that idea of the paintings you used to see of cities in space, that sort of thing. It's really going back to that era. I quite like these subtle containers around the navigation on the left and the right, mainly because when you add subtle containers like this, it really helps to show the structure of the elements, and it makes it all feel much more orderly. Now, these containers are subtle enough that they're not really going to draw your attention, but they do make everything feel neater, which I think is always worthwhile on most websites, as long as it doesn't add too much sort of visual noise. I've also noticed this just as I moused over it a minute ago. If you hover over these, you get this darkening effect for the rest of the website. I don't see that very often, so that's quite nice if you are focused on this, especially because they've got the big artwork in the background. They're reducing the visual distraction so you can read through these menus. So if I scroll down here, you can see that the subtle containers are actually just the borders on a white background, whereas up here you could not see that. So it's, I've just noticed this hover state is quite nice. Very, not necessarily painterly, but it's quite an artistic hover state. And I think, I can see that the colors are subtly shifting around as I hover over it. So that's quite nice animation because it's not drawing your attention too much, but it is giving it more of a sort of visually interesting sort of dynamic feel. But yeah, up here you couldn't really notice the white background because it's against a white background. But as you scroll down, you can see they've thought about the fact that they've got this big artwork in the background and how that's going to distract you from the text in front here. So they've given it a white background, and it's a nice effect because here it creates this very subtle effect. As soon as you start to scroll, that white background comes into play. But it's not doing that, when it's just over the standard background. So that's a nice sort of context dependent effect that's obviously anyone could do because it's a very easy thing to do. So this another amazing thing about this background is it just continues down. So you might expect a painting to just be this sort of format, this aspect ratio, but as you scroll down, it just carries on, right? And so up here you've got the focal point of the artwork. You've got things that draw your attention: the city, the car, this person, right? So those things are all going to draw your attention. As you scroll down, it changes to this sort of grass with the flowers and everything. This is a lot more background illustration, and it means that you can focus more on the content, of which there is now more. Whereas up here, it was just the big title. They needed to make a splash, needed to make an impact. But as you scroll down, you start to need to focus on the words, read things, and this becomes more of a background illustration. And it's very nice they did that all within the same background illustration. They went from one half of the painting to the second half, and they're both used for different purposes. So that's it's essentially a transition as part of an illustration. And I focused a lot on this illustration so far in this video, but one of the reasons I've done that is because it's something I haven't seen, but it's also very thoughtfully done. It's quite subtle as well. I've just noticed that the background here is generally darker. I assume that's intentional, but you've got these shadows being cast on the grass. This could have been lighter grass, this could have been less shadows, more sunlight, and that probably would have fit with the theme, a bright feature. And this is all much brighter because of the lighter colours in the sky and the sunlit grass. As you get down here, there's more shadows. I think that helps to let text like this stand out at the bottom without having to put a container around it. And the same here, the selected text is right over this shadow area. Whereas, if you had this light or faint white text over this lighter grass, that would be harder to read. So I wouldn't be surprised if they planned it this way and made sure that things lined up nicely. Although, of course, if you shrink the viewport, that might change. I'm not sure how they've handled that. Okay, so to go with the big bold statement of the background illustration, they've got this open letter from the CEO, and that's helping to support their vision, their bold vision, AI first, And so that fits quite nicely. You've got this big bold illustration, and that comes with this statement from the CEO, which fits the theme of we're doing something new, we're doing something important. One of the great things about this website is the coherence of the illustrations throughout. So first of all, they've got this big painterly background that feels in many ways completely different from this illustration on the right, because this is much more sort of line art. It's just one color essentially. It's monochromatic, just the blues. It's against a white background, so in many ways it's completely different from the illustration above, but they've made sure to still do it in this painterly style, still use this sort of blue ink approach, and so that makes them feel like they belong together. If this was just very clean lines, obviously SVG format, vector format, it would have a very different feel from the painting above, whereas this still has a different feel in some ways because of the format, but the way it's illustrated makes it fit in. So that's quite a nice way of transitioning from this big bold background illustration where you have to make a splash. Down here, you don't want to make a splash every time because you want people to focus on, for example, the letter from the CEO, but you still want it to feel like it belongs to the same set of illustrations. And so this is a very nice approach to that. And unless it is generated by AI, I can only imagine this is quite expensive, or they have an illustrator on staff, because not a lot of companies, especially startups, have the means to get this sort of illustration on their website, especially if they're in a rush. So it shows a lot of attention to detail and care, and that's probably a good thing as far as opinions about Intercom goes. I quite like the structure here. They've got this tall image, and again, I'm going to keep pointing out these background illustrations. Again, they've chosen this painting as a background illustration, so they're keeping that theme going. And this central animation illustration of the product is bold enough and interesting enough to look at and distract you enough that it doesn't matter so much they're using sort of a full painting as the background. I think this is a good balance of directing your attention. But because this is so tall, they wanted to give it a nice border around it. They've done this very nice top to bottom sort of layout here where you can click on the tabs here, because normally you'd expect tabs like this, maybe up at the top or something. But they've done this top and bottom, space between layout where they've got the title at the top, and then they've shifted everything else to the bottom. And that makes everything feel quite nicely balanced for such a tall container. Oh, and that's quite nice. So here they've got these sort of tab buttons on the left. Down here they're at the bottom. So they've also got these different layouts, which keeps things interesting, keeps you looking around the containers, but still feels similar because it's using the same components. So these are, so testimonials, and they spin around on their own. I think if I hover over them, they also spin around. So that's quite a nice way of sort of keeping the same number of boxes in a grid, but making sure that all of the people who really like your product are represented is that you have them sort of constantly spinning around, but also when someone interacts with them. This is quite a lot of sort of fiddle factor, you call it, where it's quite fun to hover over these things, and as you do that, you're seeing some of the big names that are using this. And I've just noticed, which is an interesting choice, is that these are not, I assume these are companies. For example, I recognize Amplitude, yeah, Monday.com. Okay, but these are not the logos of the companies in question, I don't think. So you can see here, Envoy, and I'm sure I've seen the same style come up. So this Monday.com on the left was there. That was a different typeface from the Monday.com we saw a minute ago. And so actually they're using their own typefaces to render the names of the companies in all these different styles, and you'll see the same styles repeated. That's a very interesting choice because usually people would use the logos of the companies themselves. So I'm curious to hear about why that's the case. I also like these colorful background containers and these photos of people in the corners. I mean, moo.com here, or moo here, is a bit of an odd one out. But to have these two slightly different containers, top right and bottom left, and have them such bright colors is sort of acting like an anchor for all of these backgroundless containers. And it's the same with these two photos. One thing I'm curious about, this is a sort of bright purple pink, and this is this teal or cyan. And I saw those colors up here. That's green. So this is the cyan support agents. They don't have the pink there. I was looking to see whether or not they were using this sort of idea of color theming, where you use specific colors for specific concepts and keep using those. And so for this cyan, it says for support agents. And this is, so there's nothing necessarily here in the cyan box about support agents. I wonder if they were using those colors sort of on purpose for the same concept, but it doesn't look like it. So this is a great treatment where you've got the same blue ink they used in the illustration up here, but down here using it for a more practical purpose where you're actually using it to show a bar chart. And so this is very inventive. If you're going to have this bar chart anyway, this is a very sort of elegant use of the illustration style, because you don't need to add an extra illustration. I mean, they do have one in the background, but you don't need to add an extra illustration to continue that style throughout the website. You can take these things you already have, like the bar chart that compares your competitors to yourself, and try and find a way to fit that illustration style in. This is something that Apple's been quite good at in the past, where I remember in one of their subsites they had a particular illustration style set up, and then they would use that throughout for their headings. For example, they would circle the most important word in the heading in the same style. And so that's quite a nice way. You don't have to pack the websites full of illustration. You can just use the same style for things that are going to be there anyway. But in this case, they do have this sort of background artistic ink drawing that sort of fades away because it's a dark grey against a black background, but it's quite nice, and it adds texture to the background and fills out the space that otherwise would be empty, right? Because if you had this bar chart on the left, you'd have nothing on the right without this illustration. If you put a sort of foreground illustration on the right here, then maybe people would be distracted from the bar chart. And if you put this bar chart in the center, this space might start to feel quite empty. So this is a very interesting choice to fill the background with sort of background illustration, and then just have the foreground bar chart on the left. So here they're giving you a long list of things that you can sort of scroll through, and it gives you a very strong sense that Intercom does a lot, which I'm sure is true. But you can scroll through things. This is quite a fun interaction where you just scroll through and it changes the photo, or the illustration. So there's not much friction in terms of someone who visits this website and scrolls through these. They can get a very quick sense, if they want to, of what the product offers. And if they had to click each of these, they'd probably get bored after the third or fourth one. So just scrolling through this, you'll probably do this just by scrolling through the website, as you scroll down. And so you'll quickly get a very good sense of how this almost endless list works, and start to explore the product. I've noticed, I assume they didn't get these illustrated all themselves, but I've noticed that all of these have a painting as a background, which again continues that very bold style. And I think it works because who doesn't like paintings? It's a very universal art form. It does make me wonder if this was custom for them or if they went and found this artwork and realized it fit, so they used it. So here you can see the background that we saw behind the start free trial button, which is sort of slowly shifting. I think it's slowly shifting here as well. It's such a subtle shift that it's hard to tell, but I quite like that because the subtle shift means that you're not distracted too much unless you're specifically looking at it like I am by this background sort of drop shadow effect. But it does add a lot of visual interest and fits the idea of this sort of painterly illustration style, since these paintings use a lot of colours. They're very impressionist, if that's the right word. And down here, I think this is just fantastic. I don't know if this is the reason that they changed it to a dark background, but first of all, that dark background helps this multicolored sort of drop gradient shine a lot more, helps it to highlight this white section a lot more. But also it really helps to highlight this relatively dark painting background, which is all blues, dark blues and greys of the sea, with I assume a similar, if not the same. No, they're different. But again, it's this futuristic flying car flying over the sea, and ties in with this idea of the new age of AI first customer service starts here. This is definitely a new age, right? It's something we're all familiar with, which is the sea, and then suddenly there's this flying car in the middle of the screen. Something's new here, But because this is a very dark painting, if you had this against a white background, it might have too much contrast almost. And so, they want you to focus on the text ideally. They've got a dark painting, dark background, that draws the focus in. And it means that this feels like it fits quite nicely in terms of sort of brightness contrast.